Section 13 of Weird Tales presents Women of Weird Fiction, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Kate Follis. Weird Tales presents Women of Weird Fiction, Volume 2. White Man's Madness. A complete novelette by Lenore E. Cheney. Chapters 1 to 3. Chapter 1. Hour after hour, John Martin staggered up the steep trail, singing bits of ribald songs picked up here and there throughout a rather free and easy past. Occasionally he paused to curse the patient pack mule that labored along in his wake, or to shout back jests and words of encouragement to the man behind him. Answers to these jests had grown briefer and briefer as the day wore on, for Jackson was not in a frivolous mood. A little wind began to filter down upon them from the high passes up ahead, and Martin shivered now and then and drank deeply of the flask that he carried in the bosom of his shirt. At last, as he rounded a point where the trail crept like a thread around the granite breast of the mountain, he was met by a blast so keen, so bitterly cold, that it went through him like the thrust of a knife blade, chilling the very marrow of his bones. Months of dissipation in the dives and bar-rooms of the coast towns had shaken him out of the strength and vigor which was his rightful heritage, and his heart was jumping like a trip-hammer as he paused and stared irresolutely ahead. As far as the eye could reach, that trail ran on and on, climbing steadily higher in long, slow spirals. As far as his dazed and uncertain sight could reach, there was no sign of life or human habitation in this inhospitable part of the Peruvian Andes. As he stood still, looking from side to side, his right hand fumbled almost automatically to the bosom of his shirt and brought forth the flask, which he tilted to his lips. A surprised exclamation broke from him as the upturned bottle yielded no drop of the precious fluid upon which he had travelled for the past 6 days. "Now, what you know about that?" he inquired, with a drunken leer at the august peak above him. "What you know about that? The damn thing's empty again. Got to fill her up from the keg. Never did see such a bottle. Always empty, empty, empty. Here you... Now, where the devil did that mule go?" He turned and peered behind him. There was no sign of the hardened mule, nor of Jackson, his fellow traveler. "Slow as cold molasses," he grumbled as he stood waiting for them to come up. "Can't make no headway with a fellow like Jackson, grumbling and growling and dragging along." For fully 10 minutes he stood still, leaning heavily against the rocky wall that lined the narrow trail. He was tired. It was good to rest, even for a moment. But presently, as no sign of either Jackson or the mule appeared, he turned and went back along the narrow, ledge-like trail, and as he went, the fumes of alcohol lifted a little from his deadened brain, and he cursed Jackson passionately for delaying their journey. But nowhere was there any sign of either Jackson or the mule. Suddenly he came to a little path that led off from the main trail up a deep ravine which cut into the side of the mountain and which he had not noticed when he had passed it some time before. He stopped at the juncture of the two trails and called, "Jackson! Hooray! Jackson!" and waited anxiously a moment before repeating the call. There was no answer. Again and again he called. His own words echoed strangely back to him, but there was no answering shout. "It stands to reason he must have gone off the trail here," he mused aloud as he considered the situation. "And yet he can't have gone very far. Strange he's out of hearing so soon. I'll have to go up here a ways after him, I guess." He hurried along up the new trail, which he could barely discern in the gathering dusk, and as he went he paused again and again to call out. There was no answer. He walked faster and faster, breaking now and then into little runs, until his laboring heart and gasping breath slackened his pace, for the little fear that had been only a trifling uncertainty at first was growing by leaps and bounds within him, clutching with horrible fingers at his quivering brain. His head ached, and his bloodshot eyes burned like flames. Suddenly he stopped. What a fool he had been to leave the main trail! Jackson had simply turned around and gone back, as he had threatened all day to do, for Jackson had long since sickened of their drunken compact to explore the ruined village of which their Indian guide had told such glittering tales. It was like Jackson's cursed selfishness to steal away with the pack mule and all the supplies. Martin remembered now how Jackson had glared at him in that silly quarrel when they had stopped for lunch. They had been good friends and boon companions when they loaded up the pack mule and started out on this trip, and when their spirits had flagged or their limbs wearied, they had had plenty of chicha to pour its fiery courage into their deadening veins. On the second day, their guide had left them, promising to join them later in the day, and though he had not come, they had kept on, with the curious persistency of drunken men and fools, making only a few miles a day, but well satisfied since the supply of chicha was inexhaustible. Jackson had wearied first of this foolish expedition. Besides, it was growing colder and colder as they climbed higher, and the journey, that was to have taken 3 days at best, had already taken 6. And now Jackson had made good his threat and turned back, taking with him what remained of their scanty supplies, as well as the blankets and bedding. As these thoughts ran through Martin's mind, he had already turned around and was running back down the trail. How easy it was to go downhill again. No wonder Jackson had turned back. What fools they had been in the first place to set out with that Indian. Martin remembered now how the fellow's eyes had gleamed as he urged the undertaking upon him. Why, he had practically talked them into the whole thing, hinting at treasure and leading them off the main trail on to this obscure one, on which they had met not a single traveler during the whole of their journey. That Indian had been a traitor. Martin saw it all now as he ran along the trail, hurrying to catch up with Jackson before the night fell. He was anxious to talk over with Jackson the duplicity of that Indian who had been angered, perhaps, at their familiarity with his daughter. "You never know about these damn cholas," he muttered aloud as he trotted heavily along. "That fellow was ready to stick a knife into us all the while. Only it was like his damned impudence to choose this way instead, sending us off up here on a wild goose chase, hoping we'd fall off some of these cliffs and break our necks. Wait till I get back to Wanuko. I'll fix that greaser. Funny, I surely have come back as far as I went up. The other trail ought to show up about here somewheres." He stopped and looked about him. Nowhere could he see a familiar landmark. He seemed to remember that the ravine had been steep and narrow at the point where it intersected the main trail. He saw now that the ravine had widened out. He could not see the side walls in the deepening twilight. He seemed to be in a sort of spoon-shaped depression in the mountainside. The trail that he had followed he had lost somewhere, perhaps when he started back, for he saw that what he had taken for a trail was a mere runway that the mountain deer had made, running in steep zigzags from one grazing ground to another. There was no real trail in sight. He could not tell whether he was above or below the main trail up which he had labored earlier in the day. He was lost. Lost! He repeated the word again and again, trying to grasp the meaning, and all the time, round and round in the recesses of his mind, fear ran swiftly, recalling stories of other men lost in the Andes and of what had happened to them in the end. He had laughed at these stories in the snug warmth of cheerful bar-rooms and club lounges, but he did not laugh now, as with white face and trembling limbs he stopped and peered anxiously into the shadows. All the food, the blankets, and even the firearms had been packed on the back of the mule, for they had found it steep going up the rocky trails, and they had stripped down to shirt and trousers. Even Martin's coat had been hooked over the horn of the pack saddle. Last night he had been cold, wrapped in that coat and 2 blankets besides. What would it be like tonight, still higher up, and with neither coat nor blankets to shelter him from the wind that slipped down from those snow-covered peaks up above? As he thought of those things, he was conscious for the first time of the awful silence that reigned about him. Not a whisper, not a sound anywhere, except the sound of his own labored breathing, which sounded harshly in his ears. Involuntarily he tried to muffle that panting breath. The effort made his ears ring, and he staggered slightly as a sudden nausea came over him. He had talked and sung songs while Jackson ate lunch. So long as he had plenty of the ever-potent chicha, he had wanted nothing else. But now his stomach felt weak and empty. He went forward a few steps, feeling his way along. If only he could find some place to take shelter for the night. In the morning he would find his way back to the main trail and follow Jackson. But the bare slopes of the mountain offered no shelter. The best he could do would be a fire under some rock. He tried to keep down the panic that grew and grew within him. He was afraid, horribly afraid, but he must not acknowledge it, even to himself, lest that little spark of self-control desert him utterly. He must not think of what it meant to be lost in this wilderness, of the slow starvation for food and water, the cold, and the utter loneliness. He must not think of his own pitiful insignificance in the face of these awful solitudes. He must not think of the 1,001 dangers that lay about him. He raised his chin and tried to square back his drooping shoulders to make a pretense of the courage that he did not feel. A little sound from the rear made him wheel suddenly and peer anxiously back into the shadows of the ravine behind him. Then, seeing nothing, he went on again. A moment later, he wheeled again. Had he heard, or had he imagined, a soft pad, pad, pad of some creature that followed silently along his trail? In spite of his caution, his footsteps quickened, and with a little smothered sob, he broke into a run, cursing his stupidity for unbuckling the gun from his belt earlier in the day. He halted, choking for breath, and turned around and listened. There was no sound from along his path. Whatever it was that had followed was gone. He could go no farther. A rock ahead, jutting sharply out of the side of the mountain, offered the only shelter in sight. He felt in his pockets. There was a handful of matches, enough to ensure a fire for several days. He looked about for fuel. Earlier in the day he had seen plenty of the resinous little tola branches which made so bright a fire, and now he looked about in the fading light, eagerly collecting a little bundle of faggots. With infinite patience and care, he arranged his fuel, and a moment later the flame flared up. His spirits infinitely lifted with the mounting blaze. Fire! What a wonderful thing it was! The gift of the gods to men! He must not let it die down. In his anxiety to get it started, he had not collected sufficient fuel, and the dried tola burned quickly, too quickly. He hurried about looking for larger wood. But on this side of the mountain there was so little that would burn. One clump of bushes promised well, and he hurried toward it eagerly. He did not see, until too late, that the supposed bush was really the top of a quinnar tree that grew out of the side of a deep fissure in the mountainside. Before he could stop himself, his momentum carried him over the edge of the chasm, and he fell, clutching at the air as his body shot downward, and as he fell a last despairing cry burst from him. "The fire!" he cried. "The fire!" Hours later he came back to consciousness for a moment. He was being lifted up and placed upon a litter of some sort. A groan of agony came from his lips, and instantly he felt a hand, as soft and light as thistledown, laid upon his forehead, and a woman's voice, infinitely tender, murmuring over him. Then the black cloud slipped down again over his brain, and he knew no more. Chapter 2. He awoke to find himself lying on a rude bunk against the side of a stone hut, and through the open door the sun streamed in, warm and cheering. He was dazed for a moment, and tried to rise to his feet, but instantly sank back against his pillow. Then he discovered that his left leg was in splints from the hip down, and that his left shoulder was tightly bandaged. The memory of his plunge down the abyss came back to him. He had broken a leg, and perhaps dislocated a shoulder in a fall that might easily have cost him his life. His head ached, and he felt the fever throbbing through his tortured body. He closed his eyes again and moaned aloud. Instantly he felt that soft hand again on his forehead, and a low voice, vaguely familiar, sounded in his ears. "Ah, the Signor is awake at last," she said in Quichua. "He would like a cool drink, perhaps." He opened his eyes and looked up at her. "Water, water," he begged. "I am so thirsty, so thirsty." "Si, Signor, I know," she answered, deftly slipping her firm round arm under his head as she held a cup to his parched lips. "Just a little while, and you will be better. Drink deep. That is well. It is the good cold water that shall make the fever fly away." He sank back to his pillow with a sigh of relief, and in a moment had drifted away again into oblivion. When he awoke it was evening. Through the open door of the hut he could see the long dark shadows that lay over the mountains, and he shivered a little. He felt stronger now. The fever and the pain had both subsided, and his mind was clearer than it had been for days. Where was he? Who were these people who had picked him up and carried him here? Who was the woman who had been with them and had given him the drink of water a little while ago? He lay upon a bed made thick and soft, with the fleece of many sheep, and a warm, thick blanket covered him lightly. For a long time he was fain to lie quietly and as comfortably as the pain would permit, but his mind was restless by nature, and his curiosity was aroused. At his side stood a rude table, and on it rested the cup from which he had drunk. His eyes fell upon it as they roved about the room. He started and gave an exclamation of surprise, for the cup, curiously shaped and somewhat battered, was made of gold. He had heard many tales of the fabulous riches of some of the mountain tribes in the Andes, and his blood quickened at the thoughts that rose up within him at the sight of that cup of gold. He coughed, stirring noisily. Instantly from the door of the hut came that voice like a silver bell. "Ah, again the Signor wakes. Is it not? Perhaps he is again thirsty." He smiled up at her and nodded assent. "I would like another drink. That cold water tastes very good to me." She laughed merrily as she held the cup to his lips. "The Signor is so very thirsty today, but tomorrow he will be so much better. Then he will beg for food, but now the water is enough, is it not? Rest you quietly now. In a little while our Dilwika will come again to see how well I have taken care of you." "But wait, don't go," Martin begged as she turned away again. Tell me, how did I come here? How did you happen to find me? I didn't think there was a human being within 100 miles of me when I fell." She shook her head doubtfully, but turned back and seated herself at his side. "I do not think I should stay to talk with you now, for you are to keep very quiet, you know. Still, there is so little to tell. My brothers and I, we were returning from a visit to a neighboring village. We lingered long, and so, in order to hurry, we took a shortcut across the canyon, because we are very good climbers, and we do not mind when the way is steep and rough. As we came along, I heard a noise, as if one groaned. I insisted on stopping to look. My brothers laughed at me and said I dreamed, but I would not go until we had searched. Then we found you, lying crumpled up at the foot of the cliff. You had fallen from high above, and I do not see why you were not killed, but so it was. We made a litter from 2 branches and my cape, and we carried you here, where our good Wika, the very wisest one in all the world, he bound your poor leg into splints and bandaged your shoulder, and in time he will make you quite well again. And because we found you, my brothers and I are to be your nurses. That is, if I do not disobey the order to keep you quiet. If I should talk more, I should be sent away, and one of the old women set to watch in my place." "I will be quiet," Martin promised hastily, and she laughed at the anxiety in his voice. "Don't let anyone else come. I want you to be my only nurse." "Do not fear," she laughed. "I will not permit anyone else to care for you, for did I not find you myself? Close your eyes and sleep again. Only while we sleep do the sick bodies grow well and strong again." Martin obediently closed his eyes, but he did not sleep. From time to time he stole glances at the slender figure of the girl beside him. She had the lissom grace of the wild creatures of the woods. She sat limply, as if every muscle were utterly relaxed, and yet he knew that at the slightest sound she would be instantly alert and poised for action. She was dressed in a soft, clinging garment of cream-colored woolen material, and around her waist was a girdle made of golden links, fastened with a flat disc, curiously carved. Gold, and more gold. Was it so cheap with this tribe that the girls made belts of the precious metal? Martin had had some little experience with the Indian women who frequented the coast towns, and was familiar with their love of bright colors and gay adornment. But this girl was not like other Indian women, at least like none that he had seen. She was tall and straight, her back unbowed by burden carrying, and her clear-cut, sensitive features were vaguely familiar to him, but for a long time he could not place the type. Her eyes were large and dark, heavily fringed with curling black lashes, and when she looked at him, their slumberous depths lighted luminously. All at once he remembered. He had seen those same features during years of wandering in the East, the Aryan Brahmins of India. But what had given this daughter of the Peruvian wilds the form and features of the best product of the Aryan race? How came India to Peru? As he lay turning this over in his mind, footsteps approached, and an old man, clad in a long dark robe of llama hair, entered the hut. At sight of him, the girl sprang to her feet and made a little obeisance. Evidently, this was the priest of whom she had spoken. Martin watched the pair curiously, as the girl, in some strange dialect which he had never heard before, began eagerly speaking. Evidently, she was describing his own condition, for the priest nodded once or twice in apparent satisfaction, before he threw off his outer garment and turned to his patient. Like the girl, he wore around his waist the heavy girdle of gold links, except that his were heavier, and the buckle at the center was set with green stones. "You find yourself better?" the priest inquired of Martin, speaking in the common language of the mountains. "I am glad to see that our rude surgery is, after all, proving satisfactory." "For which I am indeed grateful," Martin answered. "Indeed, I cannot begin to express my gratitude to you and these kind people who have saved my life." "Life is dear to every living creature," the old man answered as he deftly examined the dressing of the wrenched shoulder. "And yet, my son, that life is only of real value which serves mankind. I trust that your life is of that nature." Martin flushed red under the scrutiny of those keen eyes. He had not expected so searching a reply to his conventional remark, and he found himself at a loss for an answer. Seeing this, the priest went on. "You are an American, is it not so?" "Yes, an American mining engineer. I have been employed until recently at the Sunoco mines. My name is Martin, John Martin." "You were found in a strange place for an American mining engineer," the priest replied. "How came you so far away from the beaten tracks of the white men?" Martin hesitated. Evidently he was to be required to give an account of himself, and he realized that it would be very difficult to deceive this apparently simple old man. More difficult, however, would it be to explain truly the drunken stupidity which had landed him in his present predicament. "I was traveling with a friend of mine. We planned to explore some ruins in this vicinity, of which we had been told by an Indian guide in Huánuco, who started us on our journey and pointed out the trail which was to lead us directly to the ruins. I believe now that the fellow deceived us. At any rate, we did not find the ruins, and we traveled 6 days instead of the 3 that he promised us would be sufficient." "And your friend, where is he now?" "I do not know," Martin answered with a touch of impatience. "He was behind me with the pack mule that carried our camp supplies. I must have gone too fast for him. At any rate, I suddenly missed both of them, and I had turned back to look for them when I got off the trail. I followed a side trail, thinking Jackson had turned up it, and when I tried to find my way back, I found myself lost. It was getting dark, and I was trying to find wood for a fire when I fell. That's a whole story." The moment the last words were out of his mouth, Martin realized that they had been a mistake. In some indefinable way, the priest's manner had changed from the open friendliness with which he had first greeted him to a certain chilly politeness that told Martin plainer than words that the old man believed him to be lying. At any rate, he asked no more questions, but busied himself in making his patient as comfortable as possible. As the priest stooped to help the sick man shift his position, Martin saw a heavy gold chain around his neck, from which dangled a pendant as the old man bent forward. Martin gave a gasp of astonishment and delight as he saw that pendant, and his eyes gleamed like fire. It was an emerald, the largest one he had ever seen, roughly cut in the shape of a heart, and from the center there shone a tiny point of flame, as if a small diamond had been set within the very center of the green stone. "Wonderful, wonderful! Martin ejaculated, and then bit his lips in annoyance. Why had he spoken? The priest turned inquiring eyes to his, and then, seeing his eager glance, looked down at the pendant and hastily slipped it inside of the folds of his tunic, looking suspiciously at Martin's burning eyes as he did so. "It is nothing," he answered sharply, "only a little bit of green crystal, whose only value is in its meaning. In the heart of life the divine fire burns. May you meditate upon that message, my son, until I come again." With a word to the girl, he turned and went out of the hut, and she followed him. Martin was glad to be left alone for a moment, for he was trembling violently, and he needed time to compose himself. Who were these people? Ever since he came to Peru, Martin had heard tales of strange mountain tribes, old in the land when the Incas reigned, long before Pizarro and his cutthroats had set foot on these shores. He had heard tales of fabulous riches that they had hidden away in mountain temples, riches that had hitherto proved utterly beyond the reach of the white adventurer. And now he, Martin, practically an outcast among his own people, was thrown by an accident among one of these very tribes, a tribe which used vessels of gold for common household use, and whose priest wore a fortune around his neck in a single pendant. This was luck which he must take care not to spoil by giving away his real design. The priest was no fool, and neither was the girl. He would be very careful. He smiled when he thought of the girl, and his eyes kindled. How easy it was to read her simple heart, already infatuated with the white man that fate had cast at her feet. He supposed Indian maidens were fully as romantic as white ones. Nature used the same methods in all climes. But the thought that sent the blood coursing through his veins was the thought of a green, heart-shaped stone with a tiny flame at its core. In the heart of life, the divine fire burns. Chapter 3. For some days Martin found his entire attention absorbed by the demands of his pain-racked body. He had not only the slowly knitting leg, but the complete nervous and physical collapse which followed the shock of the fall, as well as the aftermath of his prolonged spree. But slowly his brain cleared, and his nerves grew steady, and his native strength came back, little by little, so that each day saw an increase in strength and vigor. While a great part of the nursing devolved upon the young brothers, yet a large part of each day the girl spent at his side, and these were bright hours for Martin. She was beautiful, full of natural grace and poise, and Martin forgot everything as he looked at her, except the light shining in her dark eyes and the touch of her soft hand. Under his ardent glances her eyes drooped, and a dusky rose crept into her cheeks. One day, when Martin was able to move about for the first time, he leaned upon her arm as he made the first uncertain steps. After a few moments he was obliged to rest, and as he sank down upon his couch again, he drew her down with him, pressing a hot kiss upon her round, bare arm. I love you, Taya," he whispered hoarsely. "I love you." 2 large tears gathered in her great dark eyes, but she did not draw away. Instead, she dropped upon her knees by his couch and pillowed his head against her breast. I know, she murmured. "I know, beloved. It is written in the stars that we should love each other." "Then why do you weep, dearest?" he asked as his arms went around her slim figure. "Are you not happy that we love each other? It is not a time for tears." "I do not know," she answered simply. "I am happy, And I am sad also. From the beginning, when I saw you lying there so white and still, I loved you, and I knew that you would love me in return. Of course I am happy in that love, and yet pain lies close to my heart, for now I shall be Taya, no longer. I am Taya, only so long as my heart is for my own blood. Now that a stranger and a white man has taken possession of it, I am Taya no longer. Something in the mournful repetition sent a little shiver down Martin's spine. Many women had loved Martin to their sorrow, but none had been like unto this girl. For a moment his heart smote him, but she was so beautiful. The touch of her warm young body, vibrant with life and love, made him tremble with delight. "Are you sorry that you love a white man, dear?" he queried, half playfully, secure in his Anglo-Saxon superiority. Her reply shocked him a little. "Oh, if only you were Indian!" she ejaculated. "If you were Indian, you would be like a god. But do not fear. I will love you just the same. It shall make no difference to me at all. I promise to forget that you are white." He smiled ruefully and changed the subject. "But tell me what you meant about changing your name," he asked. "Do you married women change their names in this tribe?" "Ah, no, but I am not like other women in this tribe. I am Taya," she answered proudly. "I am the one set aside, but now, alas, I will no longer be so. Listen," she continued, seeing his perplexity. "I will tell you how it is. You must know that my people are very, very long in this land. Long ago, in a time when the white race lived like beasts in their northern caves, then did my forefathers come to this land. They came from a land very rich in wisdom and all the arts that make life beautiful, and in this land they set up temples and halls of learning, and from the homeland came great teachers who instructed the people. Then, at last, there came a great earthquake, which rocked and twisted the whole earth until there was not a land untouched by it, and after the earthquake came great ocean waves, which swept all before them. For many months our people took refuge in their highest temples and prayed without ceasing. When at last all was quiet again, the homeland had disappeared, completely swallowed up by the sea, with all its great cities, its monuments of beauty, and its wise men. The few who were in this land, cut off from the home which had been the very center of their lives, still remained loyal to the teaching that had been given them, worshipping their God in the temples as before. Only now no teachers came to teach and explain the true doctrine. Then, many years later, when this land was rich and prosperous, came the white men, bringing sorrow in their train. They rifled our temples of gold, but they laughed at the golden teaching, which would have made their hearts glad and their lives beautiful. My people were scattered, as you know, but I shall not dwell upon that unhappy time. The priest of our tribe was a wise man, and he drew his little flock away to these mountains. Here we guard our sheep and till the soil of the rich valleys, where the grain grows high. And here we have lived in peace for fully 500 years. And because we have kept the faith, it is promised that there shall be born to this very tribe a great teacher, greater even than the teachers of the olden time. And when he comes, so great will be the power of his wisdom that all the world will listen to his words, even the white man, who will turn to the worship of the true law. In that day, the great golden altars will be set up again in the sight of men, and the great golden disk, will gather the rays of the sun itself and reflect them into the heart of the world. Oh, what a wonderful time that will be! How happy!" Martin, watching the color come and go in her cheeks, thought he had never seen so beautiful a picture. "But what is all this to do with your name, dearest?" he queried idly. She sighed as she answered, "Do you not see? To each of the maidens of our tribe is born the hope that she may bear the body which this great one will use. From the beginning was I trained and taught to serve in the temple because of a dream that my mother dreamed at my birth. I was called Taya, which is to say, the mother of the worshipper of the sun, and I was bound about with this golden chain to signify that I was bound to the service of my people. But love laughs at chains, and so my heart has broken through its fetters, dear, as they were, and has lit itself with the flame of your love. Loving you, I can never be betrothed to one of our own blood, and the Great One comes never to mixed blood. So it is written. But think not that I grieve, dear one. For you I gladly give up the dreams of my mother and lay aside this golden girdle. Another will be chosen in my place to serve in the temple and await the call, which may come, nay, which will come soon. But I will make my home in your heart, beloved, and pray that in another life we may be of one blood." Martin could hardly repress a smile at her earnestness. To him the tale was the tale of a child, but it would not do to let Taya know this. Under the fervour of his caresses, she was soon smiling again, and when she presently left them, there was no cloud on her brow. After she had left him, Martin lay and considered the situation that her words had revealed. There was evidently a hidden temple, as he had suspected, where these people worshipped. A temple whose great golden altars were hidden away against that time when their God should come again. He conjured up a vision of that temple somewhere in these mountain fastnesses, and his blood beat through his veins in a fever of desire. Gold, gold! The fabled treasures of the Incas paled beside the picture that this simple Indian girl had unwittingly drawn for him. To her the gold evidently meant nothing. All her attention was centered upon the teaching, but to Martin the story brought not a vision of a spiritual teacher, but dreams of the capitals of Europe, whose innermost portals would be opened wide for him if only he could lay hands upon this treasure. He was really attracted by the girl, for women were his second great weakness, and he was a born lover. When he had begun this love-making, the girl's loveliness had been sufficient attraction, but now there was added another and a greater reason. The girl loved him. She would deny him nothing. Give him plenty of time, he would win his way into her innermost soul, so that she would hold no secrets that she did not willingly share with him. It was pitifully easy, for she knew nothing of the hesitations and evasions of her more civilized sisters. To her, the path of love led straight to the doorway of marriage, and marriage surely meant giving all. A few days later she appeared, closely followed by the Wicca. Martin saw at once by the latter's stern and forbidding countenance that Taya had confessed her love, and that the confession had not brought pleasure to the priest. He braced himself for a struggle as the old man went directly to the point. "I am told that you wish to wed this maiden. Is that true?" "I do," Martin answered, a little nervously. He had not originally meant anything so serious, But these savage customs were not binding in civilized lands. The priest considered him somberly. "It is not well for a maiden to go outside her race when she seeks a husband," he said. "Do you understand that in lifting your eyes to this woman, you must forsake your own people and become one of us? Perhaps you wish time to consider these things." Martin paused, the barest fraction of a moment. He could have laughed aloud at the old man's assumption that he was lifting his eyes when he took an Indian girl for a wife. But he had no mind to let any such thing interfere with his plan. "I understand all this," he answered steadily. "I still wish Taya for my wife." Without another word, the priest turned and left them, motioning them to await his return. Presently he came back again, followed by the two brothers of Taya and several of the Indians of the village. Joining the hands of the two, he went rapidly through a sort of ritual of which Martin could understand only a word here and there. Then he took from around Taya's slim throat a golden chain from which hung the familiar golden disc. And this he hung around Martin's own neck, and lifting Martin's right hand, he laid it upon the girl's bowed head. "You are now one," he said. "Walk together in the law. Take heed, lest sorrow come through fault of your own, since sorrow earned is sorrow doubled." Turning gravely, he walked out of the hut, followed by the others, and Taya and Martin were left alone. The girl was pale, and Martin kissed the heavy-lidded eyes and begged her to smile again. But the grim manner of the priest had put a chill upon her spirits, which nothing but love could lift again. End of section 13. Section 14 of Weird Tales presents Women of Weird Fiction, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Kate Follis. Weird Tales presents Women of Weird Fiction, Volume 2. White Man's Madness by Lenore E. Cheney. Chapters 4 and 5. Chapter 4. The days that followed were the happiest days that Martin had ever known. Spring was well advanced in the mountains, and daily he walked abroad, leaning upon Taya's arm and drinking in the beauty and wonder of the world. Soon he had no real need of her assistance, so quickly did his own strength return. But still he leaned upon her, because he saw that it gave her such pleasure to feel herself of service to him. When they walked forth over the carpet of wild flowers that everywhere spread before them, she was as gay and happy as a little child. But presently, underneath Martin's smiling exterior, a fever of impatience began growing. Although he was still young, he had long ago left the days of innocence behind him, and the sweetness of this quiet life began to pall upon him. Again and again he tried to lead the conversation back to the subject of the hidden temple, for after all, that was the thing that was keeping him in this stupid Indian village. But Taya, who was eager to anticipate his every other wish, would not speak of the one subject upon which his heart was set. As his impatience grew, his temper waxed short, and presently, before 3 weeks had passed from the day of their marriage, he spoke sharply to her, so that she turned away to hide the tears. He was quick to beg her pardon for this lapse, for some instinct told him that she was not a woman who could be browbeaten into submission. Only love could win her to his will. One day, after Martin had definitely thrown away his cane, they walked far up the mountainside and sat down an overhanging ledge. Below them lay the high plateau with the village near its upper end, while the flocks grazed peacefully on the grassy slopes below. Martin watched them idly. He had no interest in flocks and herds. Taya, however, was a born herdswoman and talked incessantly of the flocks and the good pasture, which made them fat and frisky. Martin wished she would talk of something else. "Is it not wonderful?" she exclaimed for the 10th time. 1, 2, 3 years, and everything goes well with the flocks. Plenty of grass, no sickness, no trouble, everything so happy. When you are quite well, beloved, then you will go out with the other men and watch the flocks. Is it not so? I shall be so happy when you are quite as the others. Only I know you are so clever and so brave. You will soon be a leader among them. Strict account is being kept of our flocks now, for does not 1/3 of all our family stock belong to you? Are you not proud of a wife who brings you so much wealth?" He smiled at her enthusiasm. "I do not give a rap about your sheep," he returned, and then, seeing how crestfallen she looked, he added quickly, "I only care about your own bright eyes and your pretty smile. They are worth more to me than many sheep." She dimpled with pleasure at the compliment and laid her cheek against his shoulder in a childish caress. "Ah, yes, I know," she returned softly. "You are filled with such beautiful thoughts, so loving always, that you do not think often of the other things. And yet I think it is good for the family that one of us shall be fond of the sheep, and so we shall always have plenty of everything that we need. I know you care only for love, but I shall look after all things for you, for have you not given up everything, friends and home and people, for me?" He was quick to seize the opening. "Tell me, Taya," he said, slipping an arm around her and drawing her close. "Tell me more about this religion of yours. Why am I not taken to the temple you told me about? Am I not truly one of your people now? I should go where my wife goes, it seems to me." "Everywhere I go, there shall you go also," she answered gravely. "But I go no more to the temple, since I am your wife. Think not, beloved, that you alone have paid a price for our love. Because of it, I go no more to the holy places of my people." Martin started. "But why?" he persisted. "Why should you give up your religion and remain away from your temple? Why do we not go together? Thus do husbands and wives in my country." "Thus do we also," she returned proudly, "when husband and wife are Indian. But it is forbidden that any stranger should set foot in our temples. Listen, I will explain once and for all, and then we will speak of these things no more. For our law is not of my making, nor even of the Wicca, who now leads us, but comes from the past, and cannot be changed by the desires of our hearts. Once our temples were open to all who came to bow their knees at our altars. All in this land worshipped the sun god, and seeing that there was a certain metal in the earth which shone like the sun itself, my people made many beautiful works of art, and our temples were filled with rare and wonderful treasures. Then came the white men, and the sight of the golden vessels upon our altars wrought in them a kind of madness, so that they turned and slew all about them, and laid waste the land. My people fled to the mountains as the sheep flee before the wolf pack, knowing not which way to turn. Then came one of the wise men of our people, and he explained what had happened. Because the white men would not listen to the teaching of the great law, they were stricken with a kind of frenzy at sight of the gold, which is the symbol of the god, and they remained under the curse of that frenzy so long as the gold remained in their sight. So our people hid away the gold in secret places and covered the entrances of the mines from which it was taken, so that the eye of the white man no longer fell upon the thing that made him mad. And sure enough, when the gold was hidden from sight, then peace and quiet came again, and all was well. But such is the power of that strange disease over the white race, that even now, after all these years, if one of them were to discover the hidden treasure, then war and bloodshed would burst forth over all this land, and my people would be hunted down like dogs. And therefore, though I love you more dearly than life itself, dearest, yet I must obey the law of my people. Oh, I know what you would say, that you are not like those others. I know that you would not willingly bring pain and suffering upon us for the sake of this senseless metal that is like any other stone, save only that it shines more brightly. But you are a white man. The madness might seize upon even you, for in that old day none was immune. But let us not think of these things, for I fear that I do wrong even to discuss it with you, except that I want you to understand that it is for very love of you that I save you from the great curse that would surely come upon you should you persist in seeking this forbidden knowledge. Forget it. Sweep your mind clean of all these thoughts, which come only to destroy our peace. Have we not everything in the world to make us happy? Why should you seek further?" "Nonsense," Martin returned huskily. "That story of the madness is a child's tale, a myth. At any rate, you ought to trust me if you really love me." She drew away from him, and her voice was cold as she answered, "It is not a good thing to question the love of the woman who has given herself to you. Let us go down." Martin smothered the curse that rose to his lips and turned and followed her. He must not lose his temper, but such provocation tried his greatest powers of self-control. His only hope lay in this stubborn, ignorant Indian woman to whom the legends of her tribe were of more importance than anything he could say or do. Then began days of secret torture, when the humdrum life of the village wore upon his nerves like a file. For days Taya was strangely cold and distant, but he set himself deliberately to win her back again, and before long he was rewarded by seeing her full of love and happiness again. He seemed to have entirely forgotten the subject of their quarrel, making no further references to the topic that had distressed her. He watched the villagers as they came and went about their affairs. He explored every path that led away over the plateau, and sat for hours on ledges overlooking the plain, seeking to discover where they went, and whether any went secretly. But the Indians were open and frank in all their movements. Their ways were simple and easily followed. He could discover no mystery here. Behind the village, a well-beaten path led to the deep pool at the bottom of a high waterfall, from which the village took its water. Farther down, the stream broadened out and ran peacefully between wide banks, and here the flocks came to drink. Martin used often to go and sit by that pool and ponder over the problem that vexed him. He studied the steep cliffs above, over which the water fell. They seemed utterly inaccessible for human feet. The plateau widened out below the village, though the mountains were close on either side. Somewhere, either to the right or to the left, there must lie the secret trail that led to the temple. Try as he would, he could not discover that any of the Indians ever left the village, and yet he knew that they did go, and often. Then one night, turning restlessly from side to side upon his bed, he heard a sound outside on the path. Instantly he was quiet, listening. By dint of almost breathless concentration, he made out the sound, Moccasin-clad feet were slipping past the hut, but he could not detect whither they went, and he dared not move lest he waken Taya. But the first mystery was solved. They went to worship before their shrine in the darkness of the first hours of the morning. Or else, why had he not thought of that before? They went to greet the morning sun, and the temple must lie some distance away. For days thereafter, Martin was in a fever of excitement. He felt himself near the goal. It maddened him to reflect that the very children about him held the secret, and held it as well as any adult. These Indians, quiet and placid, looking at him with their opaque eyes, which baffled every attempt to read their meaning, came in the end to fill him with fury. He hated them, men, women, and children, the while he ate their bread. But most of all he hated the old priest, for some instinct told him that the priest knew him for what he was. Despite every effort of his will, Martin could not force himself to meet those piercing eyes, which seemed able to probe his innermost soul. When they met, as they did many times a day, Martin bowed coldly and turned away, giving the old man no chance for conversation. Time was passing on winged feet, and still he was kept chained to inaction. He dared not make a false move, and he could not make a direct one. He became moody and silent, and Taya's face grew sad as she began to realize that he was in heart and spirit an alien among her people. She was too simple, however, to realize that he felt himself above the people of her tribe. She had a naive pride in the glories of her own race, which was amusing to Martin, but he was seldom in the mood to smile at it. One day, after a sleepless night, he rose and walked toward the hills alone. Something must be done soon. He simply could not bear this life much longer. Rage, smoldering in the depths of his being, threatened to burst into flame that would destroy everything. His only salvation was to get away as much as possible, to brood secretly over what he had come to consider the bitter wrong that was being done to him. He sat down at last to rest, high up on the mountain, overlooking the valley. He meant to climb up to the peak above the waterfall, but his leg was not quite up to so great a strain yet. As he sat, staring moodily before him, he heard a noise in a thicket near him, and turned to see one of the village children, a crippled boy of about 12 years of age, regarding him solemnly with wide, questioning eyes. "Hello, Rottger," he called out indifferently. "What are you doing up here?" The boy flushed and half turned away, and something in his hesitation brought Martin suddenly alert, suspicious. What was the boy doing up here? Was he trailing Martin? Or was he perchance returning from... With his most engaging smile, he motioned the boy to a seat by his side and began to talk lightly of many things. Rottger, diffident and shy at first, was soon chatting gaily, sitting alongside Martin on the ledge and flinging pebbles into the abyss while Martin told him stories of the great world outside. Suddenly Martin threw an arm around his shoulders and said, "Now, Rottger, tell me, where is the path that leads to the temple? Tell me, and I will make you a kite that shall soar as high as Alkamari above the very tops of the mountains." He felt the slight body stiffen inside his encircling arm, but the boy made no answer. The long strain of repression was slipping now, and Martin trembled as his clasp tightened cruelly around the thin shoulders, and his voice grew sharp. "Speak up, I tell you. I'm tired of this damn nonsense. Where do you go at night when you creep away in the darkness? Where do they all go? Talk quickly, or I will find a way to make you speak." The boy quivered and shrank away from the menace in Martin's voice, but he did not speak. Then the long pent-up fury burst forth, for the man had gone mad through the passion of thwarted desire, for all the centuries of civilization have but served to lay a thin veneer over the cruelty of the savage, and, given sufficient prodding, the beast within breaks forth now and then, either in organized fiendishness, as in the public inquisition, or in private deviltry that finds no historian ready to record it. An hour later, spent and a little sick, Martin staggered down the trail alone, and he did not yet know the secret of the path. As he went along, he thought of what Taya had said of the madness in the white man's brain. It had seized upon him, Martin, even as it had seized upon Pizarro's men 500 years before. Chapter 5. The next morning Martin kept his bed, pleading illness. Somehow he could not bear to walk abroad, to face those placid Indians. Taya accepted with tender solicitude his explanation that he had strained his leg the day before, and busied herself in making him comfortable, until he begged her to go away and leave him alone. About 10 o'clock she came rushing into the hut, weeping bitterly. "Oh, a terrible thing has happened," she cried. "A great sorrow. My brother's child, Rottger, he has not come back. All night he has been out on the mountain. Something has befallen him. His mother thought nothing of it at first, for he's often out late. But never did he stay away all night. Even now the men are searching for him. If only you would rise and go with them. You are so clever. You would be sure to find him." A spasm of pain crossed Martin's face. Taya instantly dropped down at his side and laid her cheek against his. "There, I forget that you are ill. Rest you quietly. I will explain to the others. Besides, I will go in your place. I loved him more than all the rest." Martin murmured a few words of sympathy, but his lips were stiff, and he sighed with relief when she was gone. He had no fear that the search would be successful, but he could not banish a vision of a pair of haunting dark eyes, filled with tears like the eyes of a wounded doe. "Oh, to get away from it all," he cried over and over to himself. "To get away from these damned mountains, from these silent wooden-faced people, this constant pretense. If only he could discover the treasure and steal away with it, they would not be really injured, while his life would be made glorious and triumphant. But if the very children could not be tortured into betraying the secret, what chance had he with the adults? He felt beaten and hopeless, desperate. As he had foreseen, there was no trace of the boy Rottger, though the search went on for days. Finally, one night, Martin, tossing restlessly on his bed, heard again those faint footfalls passing the hut. This time there were many of them, so many that it seemed as if the whole village must be on its way to the temple. As he listened, he was aware that Taya was awake at his side, softly sobbing under her breath. He lay very still. He did not want to talk to her now, and presently he knew that she slept again. He dared not rise and try to follow the worshippers, for she would be awake in an instant if he stirred, and so he was forced to lie quietly while another opportunity slipped by him. Where did they go? Where did they go? Over and over he asked the question, and was not aware that the words slipped from his lips aloud. Suddenly Taya stirred, moaned a little, and murmured, "They go to pray for the soul of Rottger in the temple. They go—" The murmur died away into silence. Martin lay transfixed with wonder. She had answered his question in her sleep without knowing that she did so. Ah, long he had waited, but it had come at last, the way to his goal. Already his quick mind was busy with its plans. What had been once by accident should be again by design. The next morning he was like another man, bubbling over with good humor, so that Taya smiled again in spite of her bereavement, and kissed him lovingly as he started away for his morning walk. "You are well again, is it not?" she questioned eagerly. "Only do not go too far today. You will get too tired again as you did before. Be careful, promise me." "Do not fear," he replied lightly. "This time I go only as far as the herders' huts, where the sheep are turned out of the night pens. I am at last going to begin my work as the shepherd of the flocks." She clapped her hands with delight at his words. "Really? How happy that makes me to hear you speak so. Be sure that my brothers see you working, and the other men as well. They will see that you are not lazy at all. You have only been ill." Martin guessed readily enough that there had been some comments upon his idleness among the Indians, but he realized for the first time how much Taya must have suffered from the criticisms which he had ignored. It was highly important that Taya's mind should be quite easy about him now. He must have her utmost confidence, and he set himself skillfully to win it, sure of success. Throughout the long summer days he followed the flocks, easily mastering the trick of turning them hither and yon at his pleasure. It was a lazy life, almost as lazy as his former one had been, for the boy who attended him did most of the work, but it satisfied Taya. And when the night shut down and Taya lay sleeping quietly in his arms, every night he whispered, over and over, softly yet insistently, "Where's the path to the temple? Where is the path to the temple?" For many, many nights there was no answer, but he did not lose patience. Then at last she stirred fitfully in her sleep, murmuring low, broken words. He could barely catch their import, but it was enough. All day he went about like a man in a dream. Taya had gone with some of the other women on an expedition into the mountains in search of certain medicinal herbs, and when she returned at night she was weary and a little pale. Martin scarcely looked at her. She had ceased to figure in his thought. She had served his purpose, and the incident was closed. His kiss as he bade her good night was cold and perfunctory. Her eyes darkened with sadness, and her lips trembled, but she said nothing. Already she realized that the love of the white man was as fickle as a spring zephyr. Martin sat at the door of the hut after she had gone to bed, staring out into the soft darkness. His impatience was mounting with every passing moment, and yet he had need for the greatest caution now, lest a false step ruin everything. He must leave the village unseen just before midnight, giving himself time to get to the temple and away again before the morning worshippers appeared. Twice as he sat there waiting, the old priest passed him, going about the village upon his own affairs. Martin watched him covertly, and finally slipped his stool inside the shadows of the hut, so that the old man would think he had gone to bed. He did not like those keen, prying eyes, which seemed able to read his most secret thoughts. When at last he considered it safe, he rose and wrapped his thick cape of vicuna hair about him, and slipped away in the darkness. It was typical of the man that he did not cast one fleeting farewell glance back upon the woman whose love and devotion had saved his life. Up the familiar path he went swiftly and surely to where the great pool lay at the base of the waterfall. He paused for a moment and looked behind. All was silence and darkness. Then he stepped quickly behind a great clump of bushes which grew at the edge of the water, so close that the water of the fall sprayed over it as it fell. Martin almost laughed aloud at the utter simplicity of the thing. The broad path worn by many, many feet led just here, where the ground was tramped hard and firm, for it was just at this point that the villagers stood to dip the water from the deep pool. Martin had stood here himself 100 times, had dipped water again and again upon this very spot, and never dreamed that behind the innocent clump of shrubs lay the entrance to the desire of his heart. Now he slipped quickly behind the bushes. Deep down, half buried in the foliage, there was a rectangular opening into the face of the cliff. Martin stooped and crawled through. He found himself at the bottom of a long flight of narrow stairs cut from the solid rock. Here and there, as he climbed, he saw that narrow fissures in the roof of the passageway let in air, and sometimes he caught a glimpse of the starlit sky. The stairs under his feet were worn smooth. Through hundreds of years had the devotees of that strange cult been passing up and down this subterranean way. On and on he climbed, most of the way leading upward, but now and then long stretches ran fairly level. He hurried, but he had grown soft through the weeks of his idleness, and he found himself panting for breath and obliged to stop often to rest. Yet he must reach the temple and get away again before the priest came for the morning service, and he drove his weary body forward with the lash of his will. Suddenly, just when he felt himself unable to go farther, the passageway opened out into a great square chamber, hollowed out of the solid rock. He recognized it from pictures that he had seen of the old temples as the anteroom where the people gathered for the outer service. From the ceiling of this room hung dozens of lamps from which wicks set in oil sent out a flickering light. The lamps were curiously wrought, with fine tracing and delicate cutwork. Each would be a museum piece of rare value. The room itself was bare of furniture. Evidently the audience knelt upon the stone floor throughout the service. In the middle of the wall, nearest the opening through which Martin had come, a spring of clear, sparkling water gushed out of the rocky wall. The water fell into a deep niche, which had been hollowed out of the wall, and the overflow was carried away by hidden drainage pipes. Before this niche, 2 tall golden lamps burned brightly. With a little gesture of delight, Martin ran to the spring and buried his hot face in the cold water, drinking deeply again and again. The long, hard climb had parched his throat, and the cool water was like nectar. Then he turned again to the wonder world about him. In the center of the wall opposite the entrance was an opening, draped with a curtain of gold mesh so finely wrought that he crumpled it in his hand like a piece of woolen cloth. Yet it was so heavy that he knew it for purest gold. Through the opening he stepped into the holy place of the temple, and as he did so, he cried aloud with wonder and delight. He had been prepared for treasure, but his wildest dreams had not pictured anything half so wonderful as the sight that now greeted his eyes. Against the opposite wall, a great gleaming golden disk, so wide that Martin's 2 arms outstretched could not have spanned it, made a shining background for the great altar, wrought of solid gold, which stood before it. On the altar itself, in the center, stood a great brazier of a workmanship so fine that Martin gasped as he looked at it, and in the brazier a fire burned, fed automatically from 2 little reservoirs of powdered wood. Everything upon the altar was gold, lamps, vessels of all kinds, wrought with such skill and such richness of design that any one of them was worth a king's ransom. The light from the fire in the brazier was reflected 100 times from the dazzling surface of the great golden disk, the symbol of the sun god, and Martin's eyes began to burn and his head to ache as he ran from one thing to another in an excitement that was rapidly mounting to a delirium. He laughed aloud again and again as he spread his cape out in the center of the floor and began to pile vessel after vessel in a heap in the center. He chose swiftly here and there, trying to select the heaviest and therefore the most valuable. All the time he was talking to himself as he worked, running to and fro, tearing golden figures from their niches and ravishing the altar of its golden treasure. He did not notice that his head was pounding with pain and that his eyes burned like twin flames. He was not conscious of his body at all. He saw only this golden treasure. Gold, gold, gold everywhere. He piled it up until upon the floor he had a heap which 3 men could not have lifted. Still, there remained twice as much more. He ran to the great golden brazier and tried to lift it from its place. He staggered and almost fell, and for a moment a terrible nausea overcame him. He leaned against the altar, panting for breath, and gradually his legs crumpled under him, and he slipped down upon the floor, with his head upon the edge of the pile of treasure. "Been working too hard, overstrained myself," he gasped. And then a cry of agony burst from his lips as the pain gripped his vitals, twisting him about on the rocky floor while the sweat poured out upon his blanched forehead. While he lay thus, the curtain at the doorway lifted, and the old Wicca stepped softly into the room. Martin was too far gone now to feel either surprise or dismay at this interruption. Strangely enough, the very gold itself no longer seemed important to him. A film was drifting over his eyes. He did not care that the priest was rapidly replacing each golden vessel in its accustomed place, nor protest when the pile which he had gathered so feverishly a little while before was completely depleted. A last spasm of agony burst over him. He cried aloud, "Help! Help!" then shuddered and lay still. The priest stood looking down at him, and his eyes were full of pity, though his lips were stern. "Alas," he murmured, "there is no help for the one who drinks from the guardian spring. White man's madness, ever it leads to sorrow and to death." End of section 14.
Section 15 of Weird Tales presents Women of Weird Fiction, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Christine Rottger, January 18th, 2026, Westford, Massachusetts. A Runaway World by Claire Winger Harris. The laboratory of Henry Shipley was a conglomeration of physical and chemical appliances and papers covered with indecipherable script. The man himself was in no angelic mood as he sat at his desk and surveyed the hopeless litter about him. His years may have numbered 35, but young though he was, no man excelled him in his chosen profession. "Curse that maid," he muttered in exasperation. "If she possessed even an ordinary amount of intelligence, she could tidy up this place and still leave my notes and paraphernalia intact. As it is, I can't find the account of that important nitrogen experiment." At this moment, a loud knock at the door put an abrupt end to further soliloquy. The response to Shipley's curt "Come in." The door opened, and a stranger possibly 10 years older than Shipley entered. The newcomer surveyed the young scientist through piercing eyes of nondescript hue. The outline of mouth and chin was only faintly suggested through a Van Dyke beard. Something in the new arrival's gaze did not encourage speech, so Shipley mutely pointed to a chair, and upon perceiving that the seat was covered with papers, hastened to clear them away. "Have I the honor of addressing Henry Shipley, authority on atomic energy?" asked the man, seating himself, apparently unmindful of the younger man's confusion. "I am Henry Shipley, but as to being an authority—" The stranger raised a deprecating hand. "Never mind. We can dispense with the modesty, Mr. Shipley. I have come upon a matter of worldwide importance. Possibly you have heard of me. LaRue is my name. Leon LaRue." Henry Shipley's eyes grew wide with astonishment. Indeed, I am honored by the visit of so renowned a scientist, he cried with genuine enthusiasm. It is nothing, said LaRue. I love my work. You and John Olmsted, said Shipley, have given humanity a clearer conception of the universe about us in the past 100 years than any others have done. Here it is now the year 2026 AD, and we have established by radio regular communication with Mars, Venus, 2 of the moons of Jupiter, and recently it has been broadcast that messages are being received from outside our solar system, communications from interstellar space. Is that true? It is, replied LaRue. During the past 6 months, my worthy colleague Jules Nicol and I have received messages, some of them not very intelligible, from 2 planets that revolve around one of the nearer suns. These messages have required years to reach us, although they traveled at an inconceivable rate of speed. How do you manage to carry on intelligent communication? Surely the language must be very strange, said the thoroughly interested Shipley. We begin all intercourse through the principles of mathematics, replied the Frenchman with a smile, for by those exact principles God's universe is controlled. Those rules never fail. You know the principles of mathematics were discovered by man, not invented by him. This, then, is the basis of our code always, and it never fails to bring intelligent response from other planets whose inhabitants have arrived at an understanding equal to or surpassing that of ourselves. It is not a stretch of imagination to believe that we may some day receive a message from somewhere in space that was sent out millions of years ago, and likewise we can comprehend the possibility of messages which we are now sending into the all-pervading ether, reaching some remote world eons in the future. It is indeed a fascinating subject, mused Henry Shipley, but mine has an equal attraction. While you reach out among the stars, I delve down amid the protons and electrons. And who, my dear fellow, in this day of scientific advancement, can say that they are not identical except for size? Planets revolve around their suns, electrons around their protons. The infinite, the infinitesimal. What distinguishes them? The older man leaned forward, a white hand clutching the cluttered desk. What distinguishes them, you ask? He muttered hoarsely. This and this alone, time, the 4th dimension. The 2 men gazed at one another in profound silence. Then LaRue continued, his voice once more back to normal. You said a moment ago that my planetary systems and your atoms were identical except for one thing, the 4th dimension. In my supra-world of infinite bigness, our sun, 1,000,000 times as big as this Earth, gigantic Jupiter, and all the other planets in our little system would seem as small as an atom, a thing invisible even in the most powerful microscope. Your infraworld would be like a single atom with electrons revolving around it, compared to our solar system, sun, and planets. I believe the invisible atom is another universe with its central sun and revolving planets, and there also exists a supra-universe in which our sun, the Earth, and all the planets are only an atom, but the 4th dimension. LaRue picked up a minute speck of dust from the table and regarded it in a moment of silence. Then he went on. Who knows but that this tiny particle of matter which I hold may contain a universe in that infraworld, and that during our conversation eons may have passed to the possible inhabitants of the planets therein. So we come to the fact that time is the 4th dimension. Let me read you what a scientist of an earlier day has written, a man who was so far ahead of his time that he was wholly unappreciated. Quote, if you lived on a planet infinitesimally small or infinitely big, You would not know the difference. Time and space are, after all, purely relative. If at midnight tonight all things, including ourselves and our measuring instruments, were reduced in size 1,000 times, we should be left quite unaware of any such change." End quote. But I wish to read you a message which I received at my radio station on the Eiffel Tower at Paris. LaRue produced a paper from a pocket and read the following radiogram from Mars. "A most horrible catastrophe is befalling us. We are leaving the solar system. The sun grows daily smaller. Soon we shall be plunged in eternal gloom. The cold is becoming unbearable." When the Frenchman had finished reading, he continued addressing the physicist. "A few astronomers are aware of the departure of Mars from the system, but are keeping it from the public temporarily. What do you think of this whole business, Shipley?" "The phenomenon is quite clear," the latter replied. "Some intelligent beings in this vaster cosmos, or supra-universe, in which we are but a molecule, have begun an experiment which is a common one in chemistry, an experiment in which 1 or 2 electrons in each atom are torn away, resulting, as you already know, in the formation of a new element. Their experiment will cause a rearrangement in our universe." "Yes," smiled LaRue significantly. "Every time we perform a similar experiment, millions of planets leave their suns in the next smaller cosmos or infraworld. But why isn't it commoner even around us?" "There is where the time element comes in," answered his friend. "Think of the rarity of such an experiment upon a particular molecule or group of molecules, and you will plainly see why it has never happened in all the eons of time that our universe has passed through." There was a moment's silence as both men realized their human inability to grasp even a vague conception of the idea of relativity. This silence was broken by the foreigner, who spoke in eager accents. "Will you not, my friend, return with me to Paris, and together at my radio station we will listen to the messages from the truant Mars?" 2. The radio station of LaRue was the most interesting place Shipley had ever visited. Here were perfected instruments of television. An observer from this tower could both see and hear any place on the globe. As yet, seeing beyond our Earth had not been scientifically perfected. LaRue had been eager to hear from his assistant any further messages from Mars. These could have been forwarded to him when he was in the States, but he preferred to wait until his return to his beloved station. There was nothing startlingly new in any of the communications. All showed despair regarding the Martians' ability to survive, with their rare atmosphere, the cold of outer space. As the planet retreated and was lost to view even by the most powerful telescopes, the messages grew fainter and finally ceased altogether. By this time, alarm had spread beyond scientific circles. Every serious-minded being upon the globe sought for a plausible explanation of the phenomenon. "Now is the time for your revelation," urged LaRue. "Tell the world what you told me." But the world at large did not approve of Henry Shipley's theory. People did not arrive at any unanimous decision. The opinion was prevalent that Mars had become so wicked and had come so near to fathoming the Creator's secrets that it was banished into outer darkness as a punishment. Its fate should, they said, prove a warning to Earth. The scientists smiled at this interpretation. As a body of enlightened and religious men, they knew that God does not object to His truth being known, that only by a knowledge of the truth can we become fully conscious of His will concerning us. The frivolous, pleasure-seeking, self-centered world soon forgot the fate of the ruddy planet, and then... But that is my story. 3. It was 5 months to the day after the radios had first broadcast the startling news that Mars was no longer revolving around the sun, that I, James Griffin, sat at breakfast with my wife and 2 children, Eleanor and Jimmy Jr. I am not and never have been an astronomical man. Mundane affairs have always kept me too busy for stargazing. So it is not to be wondered at that the news of Mars's departure did not deeply concern me. But the whole affair was, much to my chagrin, indirectly the cause of a dreadful blunder at the office. Mars was closer to the sun than we are, I had remarked one day to Zettel, my assistant at the office. But I'll bet the old war planet is getting pretty well cooled off by now. Zettel looked at me with a peculiar expression which I haven't forgotten to this day. "More remote from the sun than Earth?" he ejaculated. "Why, man alive, didn't you know Mars' orbit is more remote from the sun than ours?" His manner was extraordinarily convincing, and inwardly I was mortified at my ignorance. "It is not," I declared stubbornly, then added weakly, "Anyhow, what difference does it make?" His glance of amused condescension stung my pride, and from that time on his already too sufficient self-confidence increased. In his presence I seemed to be suffering from an inferiority complex. I laid the entire blame for any loss of self-confidence upon the truant Mars, and secretly wished the ruddy planet all kinds of bad luck. But to return to the breakfast table. My wife, Vera, poured me a second cup of coffee and remarked sweetly, "The Zettels are coming over this morning, since it is a holiday, dear, to listen to the radio and see in the new televisio. You know President Bedford is to address the nation from the newly completed Capitol building, which will be seen for the first time in the televisio. If you like, I'll ask the Martins, too. You seem to like them so much." "Hang it all," I said irritably. "Can't you leave the Zettels out of it? Ed's forever rubbing in something about Jupiter or Venus now that Mars is gone. He's an insufferable bore." "Why, Jim," cried Vera, half laughing, "as sure as fate, I do believe you're jealous just because—" "Jealous!" I burst out. "Jealous of him? Why, I can show him cards and spades." "I know you can." "That's just it," laughed Vera. "That's just why it's so funny to have you care because you didn't know about Mars. It's much more important that you know more about cost accounting than Ed does." Vera was right, as usual, and I rewarded her with a kiss just as Junior screamed that Archie Zettel was coming across the lawn to play with him and Eleanor. "Well, you kids clear out of here," I said, "and play outside if we grown-ups are expected to see anything of the president and hear his address. And Jimmy, don't let Archie put anything over on you. Stick up for your rights." I imagined Vera smiled a little indulgently, and I didn't like it. "Well, at any rate," I said, "I do like young Martin and his bride. There's a fellow that really is an astronomer, but he never shoots off his mouth about it in inappropriate places." Truth was, Martin held a high college degree in astronomy and taught the subject in our local college. Just across the street from our residence, which faced the beautiful campus, stood the observatory on a picturesque elevation. Many summer evenings since my deplorable error in regard to Mars, I had visited the observatory with Oscar Martin and learned much that was interesting about the starry host. The breakfast dishes cleared away, Vera and I seated ourselves at our new televisio that worked in combination with the radio. It was the envy of the neighborhood, there being but 3 others in the entire town that could compare with it. There was yet half an hour before the president's address was scheduled to commence. We turned on the electricity. Vice President Ellsworth was speaking. We gazed into the great oval mirror and saw that he was in the private office of his own residence. A door opened behind him, and a tall man entered the room, lifted his hand in a dignified salutation, and smiled at his unseen spectators. Then, in clear, resonant tones, he began addressing his invisible audience in a preliminary talk preceding the one to be delivered from the new Capitol steps. At this point, the Martins and Zettels arrived, and after the exchange of a few pleasantries, were comfortably seated pending the main address of the morning.
Citizens of the Republic of the United Americas.
I reached for the dials, and with a slight manipulation the man's voice was as clear as if he talked with us in the room. I turned another dial, and the hazy outlines were cleared, bringing the tall, manly form into correct perspective. Behind him rose the massive columns of the new Capitol building in Central America. The address, an exceptionally inspiring one, continued while the 6 of us in our Midwestern town were seeing and hearing with millions of others throughout the country, a man thousands of miles away. The day had commenced cloudy, but ere long the sun was shining with dazzling splendor. Meanwhile, the president continued to speak in simple but eloquent style of the future of our great republic. So engrossed were we 6, and undoubtedly millions of others upon 2 continents, to say nothing of the scattered radio audience throughout the world, that for some time we had failed to notice the decreasing light. Mrs. Zettell had been the first to make the casual remark that it was clouding up again, but a rather curt acknowledgment of her comment on the part of the rest of us had discouraged further attempts at conversation. Not long afterward, the front door burst open, and the 3 children rushed in, making all attempts of the elders to listen to the address futile. "Mamma, it is getting darker and colder," exclaimed Eleanor. "We want our wraps on." "Put on the lights," cried Jimmy, suiting the action to the word. With the flood of light, any growing apprehension that we may have felt diminished. But as we looked through the windows, we noticed that outside it was dusk, though the time was but 10 a.m. Our faces looked strangely drawn and haggard, but it was the expression on young Martin's face that caught and held my attention. I believe, as I review those dreadful times in my mind, that Oscar Martin knew then what ailed this old world of ours, but he said not a word at that time. We turned our faces to the televisio again and were amazed at the scene which was there presented. President Bedford had ceased speaking and was engaged in earnest conversation with other men who had joined him. The growing darkness outside the Capitol made it difficult to distinguish our leader's figure among the others, who in ever-growing numbers thronged the steps of the great edifice. Presently the president again turned to the invisible millions seated behind their radios and televisios, and spoke. His voice was calm, as befitted the leader of so great a nation, but it was fraught with an emotion that did not escape observing watchers and listeners. "Tune in your instruments to Paris," said the great man. "The noted astronomer Larue has something of importance to tell us. Do this at once," he added, and his voice took on a somewhat sterner quality. I arose somewhat shakily and fumbled futilely with the dials. "Put on more speed there, Griffin," said Martin. It was the first time I had ever heard him speak in any other than a courteous manner, and I realized he was greatly perturbed. I fumbled a while longer until Ed Zettell spoke up. "Can I help, Jim?" he asked. "Only by shutting up and staying that way," I growled, at the same time giving a vicious twist to the stubborn long-distance dial. In a little while I had it. Paris, France, Observatory of Leon Larue. We all instantly recognized the bearded Frenchman of astronomical fame, he who with Henry Shipley had informed the world of the fate of Mars. He was speaking in his quick, decisive way, with many gesticulations. "I repeat, for the benefit of any tardy listeners, that Earth is about to suffer the fate of Mars. I will take no time for any scientific explanations. You have had those in the past, and many of you have scoffed at them. It is enough to tell you positively that we are leaving the sun at a terrible rate of speed, and are plunging into the void of the great unknown. What will be the end no man knows. Our fate rests in the hands of God. Now here, my friends, and I hope the whole world is listening to what I say, Choose wisely for quarters where you will have a large supply of food and water and fuel, whether you use atomic energy, electricity, oil, or even the old-fashioned coal. I advise all electrical power stations to be used as stations of supply, and the men working there shall be the real heroes who will save the members of their respective communities. Those who possess atomic heat machines are indeed fortunate. There's no time for detailed directions. Go, and may your conduct be such that it will be for the future salvation of the human race in this crisis." The picture faded, leaving us staring with white faces at each other. "I'll get the children," screamed Vera, but I caught her arm. "You'll do nothing of the kind. We must not any of us be separated. The children will return when they are thoroughly cold." My prediction was correct. The words had scarcely left my lips when the three run into the hall crying. It was growing insufferably cold. We all realized that. We rushed about in addlepated fashion, all talking at once, grabbing up this and that until we were acting like so many demented creatures. Suddenly, a voice, loud and stern, brought us to our senses. It was young Martin who was speaking. "We are all acting like fools," he cried. "With your permission, I will tell you what to do if you want to live a while longer." His self-control had a quieting effect upon the rest of us. He continued in lower tones, but with an undeniable air of mastery. "My observatory across the street is the place for our hibernation. It is heated by atomic energy, so there will be no danger of a fuel shortage. Ed, will you and Mrs. Zattel bring from your home in your car all the provisions you have available at once?" Jim rather winced at being addressed in so familiar a manner by a man younger in years than myself, but upon this occasion my superior. "You and Mrs. Griffin load your car with all your available food." I was going to add that you buy more, but an inevitable stampede at the groceries might make that inadvisable at present. "My wife and I will bring all the concentrated food we have on hand. Enough for 2 or 3 years, I think, if carefully used. Kiddies," he said to the three who stood looking from one to the other of us in uncomprehending terror, "gather together all the coats and wraps you find here in the Griffin house." A new respect for this man possessed me as we all set about carrying out his orders. "You watch the children and gather together provisions," I called to Vera. "I'm going to see if I can't get more from the store. We must have more concentrated and condensed foods than we are now in the habit of keeping on hand for daily use. Such foods will furnish a maximum amount of nourishment with a minimum bulk." I opened the door but returned immediately for my overcoat. The breath of winter was out of doors, though it was the month of June. The streets were lighted, and in the imperfect glow I could see panicky figures flitting to and fro. I hurried toward the square, which was exactly what everyone else seemed to be doing. A man bumped my elbow. Each of us turned and regarded the other with wide eyes. I recognized old Sam McSween. "My God, Griffin!" he cried. "What does it all mean? Ella's been laid up for a week, no food, and I thought I left him to relate his woes to the next passerby. My goal was Barnes Cash Grocery. There was a mob inside the store, but old man Barnes, his son and daughter, and 2 extra clerks were serving the crowd as quickly as possible. Guy Barnes's nasal tones reached my ears as I stood shivering in the doorway. "No, terms are strictly cash, friends." "Cash?" bawled a voice near my ear. "What good will cash do you in the place we're all headed for?" "I have cash, Guy. Give me $10 worth of canned goods and make it snappy," yelled another. Petty thievery was rife, but no one was vested with authority to attempt to stop it. One thought actuated all, to get food either by fair means or foul. At length I found myself near the counter frantically waving in the air a $10 bill and 2 ones. "You've always let me have credit for a month or 2 at a time, Guy," I said coaxingly. The old grocer shook his head in a determined manner. Cash is the surest way to distribute this stuff fairly. The bank's open, Jim, but the mob's worse there than here, they tell me. I shrugged my shoulders in resignation. Give me $10 worth of condensed milk, meat tablets, some fruits and vegetables. He handed me my great basket of groceries, and I forced a passage through the crowd and gained the street. There were fewer people on the square than there had been an hour earlier. On their faces had settled a grim resignation that was more tragic than the first fright had been. On the corner of Franklin and Main Streets, I met little Dora Schofield, a playmate of Eleanor's. She was crying pitifully, and the hands that held her market basket were purple with the cold that grew more intense every moment. "Where are you going, Dora?" I asked. "Mother's ill, and I am going to Barnes's grocery for her," replied the little girl. "You can never get in there," I said. My heart was wrung at the sight of the pathetic little figure. "Put your basket down, and I'll fill it for you. Then you can hurry right back to Mother." She ceased her crying and did as I bade her. I filled her smaller basket from my own. "Now hurry home," I cried, "and tell your mother not to let you out again." I had a walk of 5 blocks before me. I hurried on with other scurrying figures through the deepening gloom. I lifted my eyes to the sky and surveyed the black vault above. It was noon, and yet it had every appearance of night. Suddenly I stopped and gazed fixedly at a heavenly body, the strangest I had ever seen. It did not seem to be a star, nor was it the moon, for it was scarcely a quarter the size of the full moon. "Can it be a comet?" I asked, half aloud. Then with a shock I realized it was our sun, which we were leaving at an inconceivably rapid rate. The thought appalled me, and I stood for some seconds overwhelmed by the realization of what had occurred. I suppose Venus will give us a passing thought, as we did Mars, if she even... My train of thoughts came to an abrupt conclusion as I became aware of a menacing figure approaching me from Brigham Street. I tried to proceed, assuming a jaunty air, though my emotions certainly belied my mien. I had recognized Karl Hovader, a typical town bully with whom I had a previous unfortunate encounter when serving on a civic improvement committee. "Drop them groceries and don't take all day to do it neither," demanded Hovader, coming to a full stop and eyeing me pugnaciously. "This is night, not day, Karl," I replied quietly. "Don't you Karl me," roared the bully. "Hand over that grub, and I don't mean maybe." I stooped to place the basket of provisions upon the walk between us, but at the same time I seized a can. As Karl bent to pick up the basket, I threw the can with all the strength I possessed full at his head. He crumpled up with a groan, and I snatched the precious burden and fled. When I was a block away, I looked back and saw him rise and stoop uncertainly. He was picking up the can with which I had hit him. I did not begrudge him the food contained therein. That can had done me more good than it could ever possibly do Karl Hovader. The last lap of my journey proved the most tedious, for I was suffering with cold and depressed at the fate of humanity. But at last I spied the observatory. 5. The grassy knoll upon which this edifice stood had an elevation of about 20 feet, and the building itself was not less than 40 feet high, so that an observer at the telescope had an unobstructed view of the heavens. The lower floor was equipped as a chemical laboratory, and in its 2 large rooms college classes had met during the school term in chemistry and astronomy. The second story, I thought, could be used as sleeping quarters for the 9 souls who felt certain the observatory would eventually be their mausoleum. "All in?" I shouted as I ran into the building and slammed the door behind me. How welcome was the warmth that enveloped me. "Yes, we're all in, and I suspect you are too, judging from appearances," laughed Vera. I looked from one to another of the little group, and somehow I felt that though each tried to smile bravely, grim tragedy was stalking in our midst. Late in the afternoon, I thought of our radio and televisio and decided to run over to the house and get them. The streets were deserted and covered with several inches of snow, and the cold was intenser than I had ever experienced. A few yards from the observatory lay a dark object. I investigated and found it to be a dog frozen as stiff as though carved from wood, and that in a few hours. My lungs were aching now as I looked across the street at our home, and though I wanted the instruments badly, I valued life more highly. I turned and retraced my steps to the observatory. The men were disappointed that we were to be so cut off from communication with the outside world, but the essentials of life were of primary importance. We swallowed our disappointment then and many times in the future when from time to time we missed the luxuries of modern life to which we had been accustomed. Later, while the children were being put to bed, we men ascended the steps to the telescope room, where we gazed ruefully at the diminishing disk of the luminary that had given life to this old earth of ours for millions of years. I suppose that's the way old Sol looked to the Martians before the days of our system's disruption, commented Ed with a side glance in my direction. The inhabitants of Mars saw a larger orb in their heavens than that, replied Oscar, adjusting the instrument. We are well beyond the confines of our solar system. What do you see there, boys? We looked alternately through the eyepiece and beheld a bright star slightly smaller than our once glorious sun now appeared to be. That is Neptune, explained Martin, the outermost planet of the system. So we are entering the unknown. Whither are we bound, Martin? I cried, suddenly overwhelmed with the awfulness of it all. The young astronomer shrugged his shoulders. I do not know. But we shall not be the only dead world hurtling through space. The void is full of them. I think it was Tennyson who wrote. Never mind Tennyson, I fairly shrieked. Tell me, do you think this is the end? He nodded thoughtfully and then repeated. Lord Tennyson wrote, many a planet by many a sun may roll with the dust of a vanished race. Say, this is as cheerful as a funeral service, said Zattel. I'm going down with the women. I can hear them laughing together. They've got more grit and pluck than we have. You two old pessimists can go on with your calamity howling. I'm going to get a few smiles yet before I look like a piece of refrigerator meat. Ed's right for once, I laughed. We can't help matters this way. I should gain nothing by a detailed account of the flight of Earth through interplanetary space. Seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, and months lost their significance to the isolated inhabitants of a world that had gone astray. Since time had always been reckoned by the movements of the Earth in relation to the Sun, there was no way to ascertain the correct passage of time. True, a few watches among the members of our group aided in determining approximately the passage of time in accordance with the old standards to which we had been accustomed. How we missed the light of day, no being can imagine who has never experienced what we lived through. Is the moon still with us? I asked one time of Martin. I cannot ascertain definitely, he replied. With no sunlight to reflect to Earth from its surface, it has eluded my observation so far, but I have imagined a number of times that a dark object passes periodically between us and the stars. I shall soon have my observations checked up, however. How I do miss radio communication, for doubtless such questions are being discussed over the air, pro and con. We are still turning on our axis, but once in every 27 hours instead of 24. I don't understand it. Oscar spent virtually all his time in the observatory. He did not always reward the rest of us with his discoveries there, as he was naturally taciturn. When he spoke, it was usually because he had something really worthwhile to tell us. You remember I told you that the Earth continued to rotate, though slowly, on its axis, even though it no longer revolved around the sun, he said on the day we completed approximately 5 months of our interstellar wandering. I also told you that should such a calamity befall the Earth as its failing to rotate, the waters would pile up and cover the continents. I have not told you before, but I have calculated that the Earth is gradually ceasing to rotate. However, we need not fear the oceans, for they are solid ice. I may also add that with this decrease in our rate of rotation, there is a great acceleration in our onward flight. In less than a month, we shall be plunging straight forward at many times our present rate of speed. It was as Oscar Martin had predicted, and in a few weeks the positions of the heavenly bodies showed that Earth was hurtling straight onward at the speed of light. At the end of 2 years, our provisions were running very low in spite of the scanty rations which we had allowed. The telescope had become our only solace for lonely hours, and through its gigantic lens we became aware of what the future held for us. I flatter myself that I was the first to whom Oscar revealed his fearful discovery. "Tell me what you see," he said, resigning his seat at the eyepiece to me. "I see a very large star," I replied, "considerably larger than any near it." He nodded. "I will tell you something that need not be mentioned to the 7 below, Jim, because I can trust you to keep your head. For some weeks past I have known that we are headed for that star as straight as a die." I must have paled, for he glanced at me apprehensively and added, "Don't allow yourself to worry. Remember, complete resignation to whatever fate is in store for us is the only way to meet natural catastrophes." "Yes," I agreed, "man may be the master of his own fate as regards his relation to his fellow man, but he has no hand in an affair like this." "None whatever," smiled Martin, and I thought it seemed the very nicest smile in the world, except possibly Vera's. "If we are destined to plunge headlong into this sun that lies directly in our path, and is undoubtedly what is drawing us onward, you may rest assured that human suffering will be less prolonged than if we pass this sun and continue to fathom the abyss of the eternal ether. If we were to plunge into it, the earth would become a gaseous mass." "Tell me," I pleaded, "is it because we are not rotating that we are threatened with this awful disaster?" "Yes, I believe so," he answered slowly. "If we had continued to rotate, we might have escaped the powerful drawing force of this sun." 7. Since young Martin had taken me into his confidence, I spent many hours of each waking period, for one could not call them days, at his side, studying the star which grew steadily brighter. I believed as I look back through the years of my life that the increasing magnitude of that star was the most appalling and ominous sight I had ever beheld. Many were the times that in dreams I saw the earth rushing into the blazing hell. I invariably woke with a scream and covered with perspiration. I sat, it seems, for days at a time watching it, fascinated as if under the hypnotic influence of an evil eye. Finally, its presence could no longer be kept a secret from the others who saw outside the windows the brightness that increased as time went on. Printed indelibly on my memory was our first excursion out of doors after 3 years of confinement. Walking wearily along the deserted streets, we were reminded of the ancient cities of Herculaneum and Pompeii. It was not ashes and lava that had worked the doom of hundreds of human beings. The destroyer in this case was intangible, but nevertheless potent. Many silent, huddled forms were seen here and there, bringing tears to our eyes as we recognized this friend and that. But the greatest tragedies were in the homes where many whole families were discovered grouped together around whatever source of heat they had temporarily relied upon for warmth. We learned that none who had depended upon coal had survived the frigidity, and in some instances starvation had wiped out entire households. The scene which was the greatest shock to the reconnoitering party was that staged in Guy Barnes's store. The old grocer had been gamed to the end, and his body was found behind the counter, where he had apparently been overcome by the intensity of the cold during his labors for his fellow men. The last overwhelming cold had descended so swiftly that many had been unable to reach shelter in time. Next came the sad task of burying our dead. Prompt action was necessary, for the ever-growing disk of the great sun hastened the process of decay. The simplest of ceremonies were all that could be employed by men and women struggling to return the living world to pre-catastrophic normality. The sun grew terrible to behold, as large in diameter as our old sun. Still it seemed good to be once more in the open. The children scampered about, and Ed and I had a race to the square and back. Scorched to death we might in a very short time, but it was certainly a pleasant thing to spend a few days in this solar glow which we had been denied so long. Came a time when we could no longer be ignorant of the fact that it was growing uncomfortably warm. Finally we decided to do as everyone else was doing, pack up our earthly possessions and move to a part of the earth's surface where the heat was not so direct. Ed came over mopping his forehead with his handkerchief. "You folks about ready?" he queried. "We're all packed up. The Martins are going in our car." I walked to the door and gazed across the seared landscape toward the mammoth fiery orb. Suddenly I gave a startled cry. The new sun was not in its accustomed place in the heavens. It was several degrees lower down and to the east. "Look," I cried, pointing with trembling finger. "My God, do you see?" I think Ed concluded I had gone insane, but he followed the direction of my gaze. "Jim, old fellow, you're right," he ejaculated. "As sure as Mars was farther from the sun than we were, that sun is setting, which means that we are rotating on our axis and probably revolving around the new sun," I finished triumphantly. "But we are turning from east to west instead of from west to east as formerly. If the whole world wasn't temperate nowadays, I should think I had been imbibing some of the poisonous drink of our ancestors." That evening, the townspeople who had not already migrated to cooler regions held a jubilee in Central Park Square. The principal speaker of the evening was Oscar Martin, who explained to the people what capers our planet had been cutting during the past 3 years. After his address, I noticed that he kept gazing skyward as if unable to bring his attention to Earth. "Say, will you come to the observatory with me now?" he asked as I was talking to a group of friends shortly afterward. "I'll be right along," I replied. Scarcely half a block away we saw Ed Zattel going in the general direction of home. "Do we want him?" I asked, not a little annoyed. "Can't we beat it up an alley? I'd like this conference alone, for I know by your manner you have something important to tell me." "In the last part of what you say you are right," responded Martin. "But in the first part, wrong. I do want Ed, for I have something to show him too." When the three of us were again in the familiar setting of the past 3 years, Martin gazed for quite some time at the heavens through the great instrument. Finally he turned to us with a wry smile on his lips and a twinkle in his eye. "Just take a peep, boys, and tell me what you see." He strove in vain to conceal his amusement. We both agreed that we saw a rather reddish star. "That reddish star," said Oscar impressively, "is our old friend Mars, and he is revolving in an orbit between us and the sun." Ed and I looked at each other speechlessly for some seconds. Then, without a word, Ed dropped on his knees before me in something of a fashion of an Arab bowing toward Mecca. "What's the big idea?" I asked, not a little frightened, for I wondered if the confinement of the years had erased him. Oscar was laughing so that he had to hold on to the telescope for support, so I concluded there was nothing very radically amiss in the situation. "I am worshipping a god," said Ed, "for so I would call anyone who can move the planets about so that they line up in accordance with his conceptions of the way they ought to do." "I'd like to take the credit," I laughed, then more seriously, "but a higher authority than mine has charge of the movements of the planets." "Well, it certainly is uncanny how you have your way in everything," grumbled Ed. 9. There is little more to tell. The world soon adjusted itself to its new environment. People became accustomed to seeing the sun rise in the west and set in the east. Vera was ineffably delighted with the new system of time, which was necessitated by the increased orbit of the earth. Inasmuch as it now required a trifle over 2 years for our planet to make a journey once around the new sun, Vera figured that she was less than half her former age, and this new method of figuring, I may add, others of her sex were not slow to adopt. The huge sun rendered the earth habitable clear to the poles, and strange to say it caused very little increase of heat in the tropics. Astronomers proved that, though a big sun, it was not as hot a one, for it was in the later stages of the cooling off process to which all suns eventually come. 2 planets had already been journeying around the giant sun before the advent of Mars and Earth, and what they thought of the intrusion of the 2 strange worlds was before long made evident through radio communication. To the astronomers of this new era, the Welkin presented a fascinating opportunity for studying new neighbors in space, and thus the chemical experiment of the superpeople of that vaster cosmos was finished. End of section 15. End of Weird Tales Presents Women of Weird Fiction, Volume 2, by Various.